The wooden porch creaked under Ethan Sanders as he leaned back in the old rocking chair. The soft sound of the coastal breeze rustling the nearby pines. It was strange, sitting here again after so many years. The family house, though still standing, seemed smaller than he remembered, as if it too had grown weary of the years it had endured. He closed his eyes, letting the salty air fill his lungs. And for a moment, he was 7 years old again. The mornings then were quiet, eerily so. His mother, Sophia, would hum softly as she prepared breakfast in the cramped kitchen. She had a beautiful voice, though she rarely sang aloud. Ethan always thought it was because she didn't want to disturb the silence. A silence that seemed sacred in their home. Liam Sanders, his father, was never part of those mornings. Even when Liam wasn't working overseas, his presence was more like a storm, unpredictable and loud, always disrupting the calm. Ethan couldn't pinpoint when he first noticed the absence. Maybe it was when he started school and realized other fathers dropped their kids off or cheered at Little League games. Liam wasn't there for those things. But Sophia was. She was always there, balancing everything with an unwavering grace. She held their world together. Her hands worn from work. Her smile tired but genuine. Ethan idolized her in the way children often do when one parent shoulders all the weight. To him, Sophia was strength personified. But even as a child, Ethan sensed there were cracks in that strength. Small but growing, he would catch her staring out the kitchen window. Her hands paused mid-task, as though lost in a world he couldn't see. He remembered asking her once, "Mom, are you okay?" She had turned to him quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart, why wouldn't I be?" Ethan didn't know how to respond then. He only knew that her smile didn't make him feel better. It felt like the kind of smile you gave when you were pretending something wasn't broken. The day Liam came back from working overseas was one of the few times Ethan saw his mother truly excited. She had spent the week cleaning the house, scrubbing the kitchen tiles until they gleamed and rearranging the furniture for no reason other than wanting things to feel fresh. "Your father's been away a long time," she said as she folded laundry on the couch. Her hands moved quickly, almost nervously. "It'll be nice to have him home." Ethan didn't share her excitement. At 7 years old, he didn't have the words to explain why. But he felt a strange sense of dread about Liam's return. Still, when the day came, he stood next to his mother at the front door, holding her hand as they waited. Liam arrived in a flurry of noise. The taxi pulled up, the driver unloading a single suitcase while Liam stepped out, grinning widely. He looked taller than Ethan remembered, his presence filling the space like a thunderstorm rolling in. "Look at you," Liam exclaimed, crouching down to ruffle Ethan's hair. "You've grown so much." Ethan forced a smile, unsure how to respond. He had imagined this moment differently, picturing a father who would scoop him up and spin him around like he'd seen in movies. Instead, Liam seemed more interested in the house, making a comment about how small it felt now that he was back. That evening, the family sat down to dinner. And for a while, it felt like everything might be okay. Liam told stories about his time in Korea, embellishing the details to make Sophia laugh. Ethan listened quietly, absorbing every word. But even as he spoke, there was a distance in Liam's eyes. A distraction Ethan couldn't name at the time. And when Liam looked at Sophia, it wasn't with the warmth Ethan thought husbands should have for their wives. It was more like he was looking through her, already thinking about something, or someone else. The first time Ethan heard Olivia Reed's name, it was whispered in the quiet of their living room. Liam had stepped out, saying he needed to catch up with an old friend. Sophia had nodded, her expression neutral, but Ethan could see the tension in her hands as she clutched her teacup. "Mom, who's Dad meeting?" Ethan asked, curious. Sophia hesitated, her fingers tightening around the ceramic. "Someone he used to know," she said after a moment. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. Later, when Ethan overheard two neighbors talking near the fence, he learned the truth. "Liam's been seeing Olivia Reed again." One of them said, "You remember her, don't you? The one he was with before Sophia." Ethan didn't understand the full implications of the conversation, but he knew enough to feel uneasy. Who was Olivia Reed? and why was she important enough to make people talk in hushed tones? He got his answer a week later when Liam took him on a drive. "I want to introduce you to someone," Liam had said, his tone light as if they were going to meet a family friend. Olivia's house was small but tidy, with flower pots lining the porch. When she opened the door, she looked at Ethan with an intensity that made him squirm. She was beautiful in a way that felt sharp. Her features too perfect, her smile too wide. "Oh, Liam," she said, her voice dripping with warmth. "He's perfect. I always wondered what our son might have looked like." Ethan didn't understand what she meant at first, but her words lingered, circling his mind like a storm cloud. It wasn't until they left, and he pieced together the fragments of conversation, that he realized what Olivia had implied. That night, Ethan asked Sophia about Olivia. His mother froze, her face pale as she set down the plate she was holding. "Who told you about her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad took me to meet her," Ethan admitted, feeling guilty even though he wasn't sure why. "She said I should have been her son." The plate Sophia had been holding slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. For the first time, Ethan saw his mother cry. After that night, the cracks in their family's foundation became impossible to ignore. Sophia had swept up the broken plate in silence, her tears falling freely as Ethan watched, helpless and unsure of what to say. She didn't ask him any more questions about Olivia, but her quiet demeanor became even more subdued in the days that followed. For Ethan, the meeting with Olivia lingered like a shadow. Her words, "You should have been my son," played over in his mind, leaving behind a confusing mix of emotions. He began to see his father differently, noticing the moments when Liam's charm seemed rehearsed, his smiles hollow. Ethan overheard his mother on the phone one evening, speaking in a hushed voice. "I don't know what to do, Anna," she said, addressing her best friend. I thought he might have changed after coming back. But it's the same. It's worse now." There was a pause before Sophia continued, her voice trembling. "He's seeing her again." "I know it." Ethan's stomach tightened. He wanted to burst into the room and tell her it wasn't fair, that she deserved better. But he stayed rooted in place, unsure of how to comfort the strongest person he knew. The summer heat hung heavy in the air as Ethan played outside with a group of neighborhood kids. They raced their bikes up and down the narrow streets, stopping only to catch their breath or grab popsicles from the ice cream truck. It was the kind of carefree afternoon that should have been etched in joy. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As he sat on the curb, finishing his melting popsicle, he heard the voices of two women nearby, Mrs. Grant and Mrs. Fuller. Two older women who lived down the street, were chatting in the shade of a maple tree. Ethan hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their words caught his attention. "Have you seen Liam lately?" Mrs. Grant asked, her tone tinged with disapproval. "He was at the Anchor Cafe with Olivia Reed again." Mrs. Fuller let out a soft sigh. "Poor Sophia. She deserves better than that man. Everyone in town knows he's been running around with Olivia for years." "Does she know?" Mrs. Grant asked. "Oh, she knows," Mrs. Fuller replied. "But what can she do? She's got two kids to think about. I imagine it's easier to keep quiet than to stir up trouble." Ethan felt his face flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment. He jumped on his bike and pedaled away, their words chasing him down the street. The idea that the entire town knew about his father's infidelity, and pitied his mother for enduring it, was unbearable. One evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Sophia finally confronted Liam. Ethan sat at the top of the stairs, peeking through the banister as their voices echoed through the house. "Do you think I don't know where you've been?" Sophia demanded, her voice shaking with anger. "I'm not stupid, Liam. Everyone in this town is talking about you and Olivia." Liam, sitting on the couch with his feet propped up on the coffee table, didn't even bother to look up. "You're overreacting, Sophia," he said lazily. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think," Sophia repeated, her voice rising. "You've been meeting her behind my back, spending money we don't have, humiliating me in front of everyone. How can you stand there and deny it?" Liam finally looked at her, his face hardening. "You don't know what you're talking about. And even if I was seeing her, it's your fault." Sophia froze, stunned by his audacity. My fault? She whispered. Her voice barely audible. Yes. Your fault. Liam snapped. You're so wrapped up in being a martyr that you forgot how to be a wife. You make everything so damn miserable. Sophia, I needed someone who... He stopped himself. But the damage was done. Sophia took a step back. As if the words had physically struck her. You don't even feel guilty. Do you? She said. Her voice breaking. You don't care what this does to me. To Ethan. To Grace. Liam shrugged. I'm not the one who needs to change. Ethan clenched his fists as he listened. He wanted to storm down the stairs and shout at his father. To tell him he was wrong. But the look on his mother's face stopped him. He had never seen her so defeated. The next day, Sophia sent Ethan to the store to pick up a few groceries. It was a small errand, but one she gave him often when she needed time alone. On the way back, he saw his grandfather, Samuel Sanders, sitting on the porch of his house. Samuel waved him over. Ethan, come sit with me for a bit. Ethan hesitated but eventually walked up the steps and sat on the bench beside his grandfather. Samuel was a quiet man. His presence as steady as the tides. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. I saw your father yesterday, Samuel said, his voice low. He had Olivia with him. Ethan looked down at his hands, unsure of what to say. Samuel sighed deeply. I don't know what's wrong with that boy. He's got a good woman at home. 2 beautiful kids. And he still manages to throw it all away. Why doesn't mom leave him? Ethan blurted out before he could stop himself. Samuel was silent for a moment. His weathered hands resting on his knees. Because she loves him, he said finally. And because she thinks staying is what's best for you and Grace. Your mother, she's stronger than you think. Ethan, but even the strongest people have their limits. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. I don't want her to stay. He said quietly. I don't want her to keep getting hurt. Samuel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You're a good boy, he said, but this is a fight your mother has to decide for herself. Just be there for her when she needs you. That evening, Ethan approached Sophia as she folded laundry in the living room. The glow of the lamp cast soft shadows on her face, accentuating the tired lines around her eyes. Mom, he said hesitantly. Why don't you leave Dad? Sophia froze, the shirt she was holding slipping from her hands. She looked at him, her expression a mix of sadness and something he couldn't quite place. Ethan, she said softly, you're too young to understand. Maybe, Ethan replied, but I know you don't deserve this. Sophia sighed, sitting down on the couch beside him. I stay because I want you and Grace to have a family. She said, I don't want you to grow up feeling like you don't belong. But we don't feel like we belong now. Ethan said, his voice breaking. Dad doesn't care about us. He doesn't care about you. Sophia reached out, pulling him into a hug. I'm doing the best I can. She whispered, I promise you, I'm trying. Ethan didn't argue, but in his heart, he resolved to protect his mother however he could, even if it meant standing up to his father one day. The summer stretched on, its oppressive heat mirroring the atmosphere inside the Sanders household. Ethan often found himself retreating to his room or taking long walks along the rocky coastline to escape the tension. The rumors about Liam and Olivia had grown louder, no longer confined to whispers but openly discussed by neighbors and acquaintances. For Ethan, every passing comment felt like a knife, each one deeper than the last. It was during one of these walks that Ethan overheard a conversation between 2 teenage boys near the dock. Did you hear? Liam Sanders brought that Olivia woman to the Lighthouse Inn again. One said, laughing. Everyone knows what they're up to. The other boy snickered. Poor Sophia. I don't know how she puts up with it. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to yell at them, to tell them to shut up. But instead, he turned and ran back toward the house. He couldn't bring himself to face anyone, least of all his father. When he got home, Sophia was at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her eyes scanning his face. What's wrong? She asked gently. Nothing, Ethan mumbled, heading for his room. But as he climbed the stairs, he could hear her voice tremble as she called after him. Ethan, you can talk to me. He paused, gripping the banister. He wanted to tell her everything he'd overheard, to demand why she wasn't doing anything to stop it. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, "I'm fine, Mom," and shut his bedroom door behind him. Dinner that night was a strained affair. Grace, now 10 years old, chattered on about her day at school, oblivious to the tension that hung like a storm cloud. Sophia nodded and smiled at her daughter's stories, but her eyes darted nervously to Liam, who sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone. Ethan stabbed at his food, barely eating. He couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Dad," he said suddenly, his voice sharp, "why don't you spend more time at home?" Liam looked up, surprised. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan's grip on his fork tightened. "You're always out. You never help Mom. And everyone in town knows." He stopped himself, his heart pounding. "Knows what?" Liam's tone was cold, his eyes narrowing. Sophia quickly interjected, her voice trembling. "Ethan, that's enough." "No, let him talk," Liam said, leaning back in his chair. "What's everyone in town saying?" Ethan's face burned, but he refused to back down. "They're saying you're with Olivia," he blurted out. The room fell silent. Grace looked back and forth between them, confused. Sophia's hands shook as she reached for her glass of water. Liam's expression darkened. "And what business is it of yours, boy?" Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "It's my business because you're embarrassing Mom. You're embarrassing all of us." "Ethan," Sophia's voice was a sharp warning, but it was drowned out by Liam's rising anger. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," Liam growled, standing as well. "You don't know anything about being a man. So don't pretend you understand." Ethan's hands balled into fists. "A man takes care of his family," he shot back. "A man doesn't humiliate his wife." "Ethan, go to your room," Sophia shouted, her voice cracking. Tears streamed down her face as she placed herself between her husband and son. Ethan hesitated, his chest heaving. Before storming upstairs, he slammed the door and collapsed onto his bed, his fists still clenched. From downstairs, he could hear Liam's voice, low and furious, but Sophia's soft sobs were what stuck with him. The following weekend, Ethan and Grace played catch in the yard. It was one of the rare moments of levity in an otherwise tense household. Grace's laughter echoed through the air as she chased after the ball, her ponytail bouncing. "Ethan, do you think Dad's mad at us?" she asked suddenly, her voice quiet. Ethan paused, caught off guard. "Why would you think that?" he asked. Grace shrugged, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "I heard him yelling at Mom the other night. He said we're too expensive and that's why he can't save money." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Grace, listen to me," he said, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "None of this is your fault. Okay, Dad? He just doesn't know how to handle things sometimes." Grace nodded slowly, but the sadness in her eyes lingered. "Do you think they'll get a divorce?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't know how to answer. He wanted to tell her the truth, that maybe a divorce would be the best thing for all of them. But he didn't want to scare her. Instead, he pulled her into a hug. "Don't worry about that, okay? I'll take care of you." Grace smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're the best big brother," she whispered. The rumors about Liam and Olivia reached their peak when Ethan was in high school. One day, as he walked through the halls, a classmate stopped him. "Hey, Sanders," the boy sneered. "How's your new sibling?" Ethan froze. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. The boy smirked. "Didn't you hear? Olivia Reed had your dad's baby. Everyone's talking about it." Ethan's stomach churned. He left school early that day, his mind racing. When he got home, he found Sophia sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a piece of paper. "Mom, is it true?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Did Dad have a baby with her?" Sophia looked up, her eyes hollow. She didn't say anything, but the answer was written all over her face. Ethan slammed his fist against the table, making the dishes rattle. "How can you let him do this to you?" "To us?" Sophia flinched but said nothing. The breaking point came a few months later, during a family gathering at Liam's parents' house. Everyone was seated around the living room, exchanging pleasantries, when the door opened, and Olivia walked in. She was holding a baby in her arms, The room went silent. Liam invited us, Olivia said, smiling as though nothing were amiss. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at Sophia, who sat frozen, her face pale. Liam stood and walked over to Olivia, taking the baby from her arms. "This is Noah," Liam said, his voice full of pride. "Your new brother." Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He stood abruptly, his chair toppling over. "You're unbelievable," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You think you can just bring them here like nothing happened?" "Ethan, sit down," Liam said sharply. "No," Ethan shouted. "You don't care about this family. You never have." Liam's face darkened, but Ethan didn't wait for a response. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Ethan stormed out of his grandparents' house, the cold coastal air stinging his face as he fought to hold back tears. He could still hear Liam's voice echoing in his mind, so proud as he introduced Noah like a prized trophy. How could someone be so shameless, so utterly blind to the pain he was causing? Behind him, he heard hurried footsteps. Sophia had followed him outside, her face pale, her arms wrapped around herself to ward off the chill. "Ethan, wait," she called softly. He stopped but didn't turn to face her. "Why, Mom?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why do you let him do this to us?" "To you?" Sophia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Because I have to," she said finally. "Because if I leave, what do we have? What do you and Grace have?" "We'd have peace," Ethan shot back, pulling away. "We wouldn't have to watch him parade his lies around like this." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "It's not that simple," she whispered. "You think I don't want to leave? That I don't lie awake every night wondering if I made the wrong choice? Then why don't you?" Ethan demanded, his voice rising. "You're not helping us by staying. You're just teaching us that it's okay to be treated like this." Sophia flinched as if he'd struck her. "Don't say that," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare think I'm doing this for me." Ethan wanted to argue, but the look on her face stopped him. He could see how tired she was, how deeply the years of pain had etched themselves into her features. He sighed, the fight draining out of him. "I just want better for you," he said quietly. "For all of us." "I know," Sophia replied, her voice barely audible. "But this is the life we have, Ethan, and until I can figure out a way to make it better, I need you to be strong, for me and for Grace." Ethan nodded reluctantly, but a part of him knew he couldn't stay silent forever. When Ethan returned home that night, Liam was waiting for him in the living room. The room was dark except for the flickering light from the television. Liam sat in his usual spot, a beer in hand, his expression unreadable. "You want to talk about what happened today?" Liam asked, his tone calm but cold. Ethan stood in the doorway, his fists clenched. "What's there to talk about? You embarrassed Mom. You embarrassed all of us." Liam scoffed, setting his beer down on the coffee table. "Embarrassed? You don't know what you're talking about." "Boy, don't call me that," Ethan snapped. "I'm not a boy, and I'm not blind. You're parading Olivia and her kid around like it's normal. It's disgusting." Liam's face hardened. "Watch your mouth," he warned. "You don't know what it's like to be in my position." "And what position is that?" Ethan shot back. "The position where you destroy your family and expect everyone to just accept it?" Liam stood abruptly, towering over Ethan. "You don't get it, do you? Your mother and we're not like you think. She's not perfect, and neither am I sometimes. People need more than one person can give them." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare blame this on her," he said through gritted teeth. "She's done nothing but hold this family together while you've torn it apart." Liam took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "You don't know anything about marriage. When you've lived a few more years, maybe you'll understand." Ethan shook his head, his voice trembling with fury. "I don't need years to understand what kind of man I don't want to be." For a moment, it seemed like Liam might lash out. But instead, he laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Suit yourself," he said, turning away. "But don't come crying to me when you realize the world isn't as black and white as you think." Ethan stormed upstairs, his chest heaving. He knew he'd never see his father the same way again. A week later, Ethan found Grace crying in her room. She was curled up on her bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. He knocked softly on the doorframe before stepping inside. "Grace," he said gently. "What's wrong?" She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I heard them fighting again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad was yelling at Mom, saying it's her fault he had to find someone else." Ethan felt a surge of anger but forced himself to stay calm. He sat down beside her, pulling her into a hug. "It's not her fault," he said firmly. "Don't ever think that." "Then why does he say it?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "Why does he hate her so much?" "He doesn't hate her," Ethan replied, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "He's just selfish. He doesn't know how to appreciate what he has." Grace sniffled, burying her face in his shoulder. "I wish he'd just leave," she said quietly. Ethan tightened his arms around her. "Me too," he admitted, "but we'll get through this. I promise." Sophia had always been a pillar of strength. But even pillars have their limits. Late one night, Ethan heard a crash in the kitchen and rushed downstairs to find her sobbing on the floor. Broken dishes scattered around her. "Mom," he exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" Sophia shook her head. Unable to speak, she clutched at her chest as though trying to hold herself together. "I can't do this anymore," she finally whispered. "I thought I could, but I can't." Ethan helped her to her feet, guiding her to a chair. "You don't have to," he said softly. "We can leave. You, me, and Grace. We can start over." Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "But what will people say?" she asked. "What will happen to you and Grace without him?" "We'll be fine," Ethan assured her. "We're stronger than you think." Sophia nodded slowly, as if she were finally beginning to believe it. The next morning, Sophia sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the warm ceramic. Ethan entered quietly, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of resolve. She looked worn, as if the weight of years had suddenly pressed down on her all at once. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About leaving." Ethan sat down across from her, his heart pounding. "And?" Sophia exhaled shakily, her gaze still fixed on the trees swaying gently outside. "You're right. We can't keep living like this. But I'm scared, Ethan. I don't know where to start." "We'll figure it out together," he assured her, his voice steady. "I can help. I'll work. Do whatever I need to. We'll find a way." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. But this time, they weren't solely of sadness. "I don't want you and Grace to carry this burden," she said. "You're both so young. We're stronger than you think." "Mom," Ethan replied firmly, "we can do this." Sophia reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Okay," she said softly. "We'll do it." The following weeks were a blur of quiet planning and subtle changes. Sophia began setting aside small amounts of money from her job, tucking it into a jar hidden behind the old set of cookbooks in the kitchen. Ethan started working extra shifts at the local diner, telling his father it was to save for college. Grace, though not privy to the full plan, could sense something was changing. "Why is everyone being so quiet?" she asked one evening as Ethan helped her with her homework. "Sometimes being quiet is the best way to get things done," Ethan replied, ruffling her hair. "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." Sophia spent her evenings researching affordable housing options in nearby towns. She didn't tell anyone about her plans, not even her closest friends. The fear of Liam finding out loomed large. But for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. The breaking point came one stormy evening when Liam returned home drunk. The door slammed against the wall as he stumbled inside, his clothes damp from the rain. Sophia and Ethan were in the living room, Grace already asleep upstairs. "Where the hell have you been?" Liam slurred, his eyes narrowing as he pointed at Sophia. "Out with someone else." "Huh? That's why you've been acting so distant?" Sophia stood, her face pale but resolute. "I've been here, Liam, taking care of your children while you've been out God knows where." "Don't start with me," Liam snapped, staggering closer. "You think you're better than me? You think you're some kind of saint?" Ethan rose to his feet, positioning himself between his parents. That's enough, he said sharply. Go to bed. Liam sneered, his gaze shifting to Ethan. Oh, look at you, acting all high and mighty. Just like your mother. Leave her alone, Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with anger. Liam took a step closer, his fists clenched. Or what? Sophia's voice cut through the tension. Ethan, go upstairs. I'm not leaving you with him. Ethan protested. I said go, Sophia repeated, her tone firm. Ethan hesitated but eventually obeyed, casting one last glare at his father before retreating to his room. As he lay in bed, he heard muffled voices downstairs. Sophia's tone was calm but unyielding, while Liam's grew louder and angrier. Then, finally, silence. The next morning, Liam was gone. He'd left early for work, his temper having burned itself out. But Sophia's decision had solidified. We're leaving, she told Ethan quietly as she poured him a cup of coffee. As soon as I can get everything in order. A month later, everything was ready. Sophia had secured a small apartment in a neighboring town. Modest but safe, she'd packed only the essentials, careful not to arouse suspicion. On a sunny Saturday morning, while Liam was at work, Sophia, Ethan, and Grace loaded the last of their belongings into the car. Grace looked nervous, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. Where are we going? She asked, her voice small. To a better place, Sophia said with a reassuring smile. You'll like it. There's a park nearby and a good school. Ethan helped her into the car, then turned to his mother. Are you ready? Sophia nodded, though tears glistened in her eyes. Yes, she said. It's time. As they drove away from the house, Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The home they were leaving had been filled with pain, but it had also been the backdrop for countless memories. Still, he knew this was the right choice. The first few weeks in their new home were quiet but peaceful. Grace quickly adjusted to her new school, making friends and regaining the spark that had dimmed during the turmoil. Sophia began working at a local bakery, the early mornings a welcome distraction. Ethan continued his job at the diner, picking up extra shifts whenever he could. Though their new life wasn't easy, it was free of the constant tension that had plagued them before. One evening, as they sat around the small kitchen table eating dinner, Sophia smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. Thank you, she said, looking at Ethan, for everything. Ethan shook his head. We did this together, he replied, and we're going to be okay. It didn't take long for Liam to realize they were gone. He arrived home from work on Monday evening to find the house eerily silent. The furniture was still there, but the personal touches, the family photos, Sophia's favorite vase, Grace's school drawings on the fridge, were missing. Liam called out, his voice echoing through the empty space. Sophia? Ethan? Grace? No one answered. As the realization sank in, Liam's anger erupted. He stormed through the house, flinging open cabinets and drawers as if searching for answers. He found nothing but a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. Liam, this isn't a decision I made lightly. I've stayed longer than I should have, hoping things would get better. But they haven't. The kids and I need peace. And we can't have that here. Please don't try to find us. This is what's best for everyone. Sophia. The paper crumpled in Liam's fist as he threw it across the room. For a moment, he stood frozen, his chest heaving. Then he grabbed his phone and dialed Ethan's number. Ethan was clearing tables at the diner when his phone buzzed. Seeing Liam's name on the screen, he hesitated before answering. What do you want? Ethan said, his voice cold. Where are you? Liam demanded. Where's your mother? You think you can just leave without telling me? Ethan stepped outside, away from the clatter of the diner. We don't owe you anything, he said firmly. You brought this on yourself. You're a damn coward, Liam snapped, running away instead of facing your problems. Do you know how this makes me look? It's not about you, Ethan shot back. For once in your life. It's not about you. It's about Mom and Grace and me. We deserve better. Liam's voice lowered, venomous. You think you're better than me, don't you? You don't know the first thing about being a man. Ethan's jaw tightened. Being a man doesn't mean tearing people down to feel powerful. If that's what you think, then I'm glad I'm nothing like you. Liam was silent for a moment, his breath heavy on the line. You'll regret this, he said finally. You'll come crawling back. Ethan ended the call without responding, his heart pounding in his chest. He leaned against the wall of the diner, staring out at the empty parking lot. For all Liam's bluster, Ethan felt something he hadn't in years: freedom. The first few months in their new life were challenging. The apartment was small, with just enough space for the three of them. Money was tight, and Sophia often came home from the bakery with aching feet and flour dusting her hair. But the atmosphere was lighter, the tension that had defined their old life gone. Grace thrived at her new school, quickly making friends and excelling in her classes. She joined the school's art club, spending her afternoons painting and drawing. Her laughter filled the apartment, a sound Ethan hadn't realized he missed so much. Ethan worked long hours at the diner, saving every penny he could. He applied for scholarships and planned to enroll in community college the following year. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had control over his future. Sophia, too, began to change. She started baking at home again, experimenting with recipes and filling the apartment with the warm, sweet scents of cookies and cakes. She smiled more often, her laugh no longer strained. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, she turned to Ethan. Do you think we made the right choice? She asked, her voice soft. Ethan looked at her, his expression steady. Absolutely, he said. Look at Grace. Look at you. We're happy, Mom. That's what matters. Sophia nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. Despite Sophia's request not to be found, Liam wasn't one to let things go. Several months after they'd left, he showed up unannounced at the bakery where Sophia worked. She was in the middle of icing a batch of cupcakes when she heard his voice. Sophia. Her hand froze mid-swipe, the icing bag trembling slightly. She turned slowly, her heart pounding. Liam stood at the counter, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Why do you think? Liam replied. You took my kids and disappeared. You think I was just going to let that slide? Sophia set the icing bag down carefully. We left because we needed peace. She said. You're not here to fix anything, Liam. You're here because you can't stand losing control. That's not true, Liam argued, though his voice lacked conviction. I want my family back. Sophia shook her head, her resolve unwavering. You had your chance, Liam. You had years of chances. This is the life we've chosen, and you're not part of it. For a moment, Liam looked like he might argue, but something in Sophia's expression stopped him. Without another word, he turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling softly as it closed behind him. Over time, the scars of their old life began to fade. Ethan enrolled in community college, studying business and dreaming of opening his own cafe one day. Grace's artistic talent flourished, and her paintings began to gain recognition in local galleries. Sophia, inspired by the stability they'd built, took a leap of faith and opened her own bakery. She called it Second Rise, a name that reflected their journey of resilience and renewal. The shop quickly became a beloved part of the community, with customers praising not just the baked goods but the warmth and kindness that Sophia brought to the space. Liam's shadow still lingered in small ways, a stray memory, a phone call that went unanswered, but it no longer defined their lives. They had built something new, something strong, and they weren't looking back. Years passed, and life for the Sanders family slowly fell into a rhythm that felt safe and fulfilling. Ethan graduated from college, opening a small cafe in the same town as Sophia's bakery. Their businesses often collaborated, with Sophia's pastries becoming a staple on Ethan's menu. Grace, now in high school, was thriving in both academics and art, her paintings winning awards at regional competitions. Liam remained a distant figure. Occasionally, he sent messages, short, clipped texts to Ethan or Sophia, asking how Grace was doing or if he could visit. They never responded. The scars he left were still too fresh, even after years of separation. One rainy evening, as the family sat together in the cozy apartment, a knock echoed through the door. Sophia hesitated before opening it, revealing Liam standing there, drenched from the storm. "What are you doing here?" Sophia asked, her voice firm but calm. Liam's once proud demeanor had faded. His shoulders were slumped, his hair streaked with gray, and his eyes lacked the sharpness they once held. "I needed to see you all," he said quietly. I wanted to apologize." Sophia let Liam in, though she remained guarded. Ethan and Grace sat silently on the couch, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. "I know I don't deserve to be here," Liam began, his voice trembling, "but I've had a lot of time to think about what I've done. I've ruined so much, and I can't change the past. But I needed to say I'm sorry." Sophia crossed her arms, her eyes fixed on him. "Sorry doesn't undo the years of damage, Liam," she said, her tone steady. "It doesn't undo what you put me, Ethan, and Grace through." "I know," Liam admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I've been trying to change. I stopped drinking. I've been going to counseling. I just wanted to see if there's any chance you could forgive me." Ethan spoke up, his voice sharp. "Forgiveness isn't about you, Dad. It's about us. And honestly, I don't know if I can give you that." Liam nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand. I want you all to know I'm trying." Sophia sighed, the years of pain and disappointment weighing heavily on her. "Liam, I hope you are. But forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you have to earn, if it ever comes at all." Grace, who had been quiet until now, spoke softly. "I don't hate you, Dad, but I don't think I want you in my life right now. I'm happy now. We all are." Liam nodded again, tears in his eyes. "I'm glad you're happy," he said. "That's all I want." He didn't stay long, and when he left, it was with the understanding that he might never fully reconcile with the family he had broken. But for the first time, he seemed to accept that truth. As the door closed behind Liam, Sophia turned to Ethan and Grace, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't think I'd ever see him again," she admitted, "and I don't know how I feel about it." "Me neither," Ethan replied, "but we don't owe him anything. Mom, we've built something better without him." Sophia nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "We have, haven't we?" In the weeks that followed, Liam didn't reach out again. It was as if his visit had been his way of closing a chapter, leaving the family to continue writing their own story. And they did. Sophia's bakery flourished, becoming a gathering place for the community. Ethan's cafe expanded, and he began mentoring other young entrepreneurs, determined to break cycles of dysfunction in his own way. Grace received a scholarship to study art at a prestigious university, her talent a testament to the life they had built together. On the anniversary of their move, the family gathered at the park near their apartment. They sat on a picnic blanket, laughing as they shared stories and dreams for the future. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over them. "I think we did okay," Sophia said softly, her gaze sweeping over her children. "We did more than okay," Ethan replied, his voice filled with pride. "We built something strong." Grace leaned against her brother, her sketchbook open in her lap. "We're free," she said simply. And for the first time in years, the Sanders family felt whole. Years later, Ethan stood outside his cafe, looking out at the bustling street. Life had brought him challenges, but it had also brought him peace. The choices they had made, hard, painful choices, had given them a future they could be proud of. Sophia retired from her bakery, spending her days tending a small garden and enjoying the quiet life she had long craved. Grace, now a celebrated artist, visited often, her laughter filling the rooms of their home. As Ethan locked the cafe door one evening, he paused to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. He thought of his mother's resilience, his sister's hope, and his own determination to rise above the shadows of his father's actions. They had come so far, and though the scars remained, they no longer defined them. In the end, the Sanders family proved that no matter how deep the cracks, there's always a way to rebuild, stronger, brighter, and freer than before.